It was a quiet evening in the small town of Millfield, with the only sound being the gentle hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a distant dog. Rachel had just finished her shift at the local diner and was looking forward to a relaxing night at home. She had just settled down on her couch with a cup of tea and her favorite book when her phone rang. Looking at the caller ID, Rachel didn't recognize the number, but she answered it anyway, expecting it to be a wrong number or a telemarketer. But when she picked up the phone, all she heard was silence. She said, "Hello?" a few times, but there was no response. After a few moments of silence, she hung up and went back to her book. Just a few minutes later, Rachel's phone rang again. It was the same number as before. This time she let it go to voicemail, assuming it was just a persistent telemarketer. But when she listened to the message, her heart stopped. The message was short, but chilling. It was the sound of heavy breathing, with a deep, gravelly voice saying, "I'm coming for you, Rachel. I know where you live." Rachel's hands started shaking as she listened to the message again and again, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Her mind raced with thoughts of who could be behind the call. Was it an ex-boyfriend? A disgruntled customer from the diner? Or something much, much worse? Rachel tried calling the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to call the police and have them think she was overreacting, but she also didn't want to ignore the threat and risk her safety. As the night went on, Rachel became increasingly paranoid. Every sound outside her window made her jump, and she kept checking the locks on her doors and windows. She tried calling a few friends to talk about what had happened, but no one answered. Just as Rachel was about to give up and try to get some sleep, her phone rang again. It was the same number. This time, Rachel answered it, determined to confront whoever was on the other end. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with fear. There was a moment of silence, and then the same deep, gravelly voice spoke again. "You shouldn't have answered the phone, Rachel. Now I know you're home." Rachel's heart was pounding as she hung up the phone. She knew she had to get out of her house and go somewhere safe. She quickly packed a bag with some clothes and essentials and headed for her car. As she was driving away, she saw a figure in her rearview mirror, standing in front of her house. It was too dark to make out any details, but Rachel knew it was the same person who had called her. She drove as fast as she could to the nearest police station, praying that she would make it there safely. When she arrived at the station, Rachel was in tears as she told the officers what had happened. They took her statement and promised to do everything they could to catch the person responsible. Days went by with no word from the police. Rachel was still living in fear, never knowing when the person who had threatened her would strike. Every phone call, every knock on the door, made her jump. Then, one night, Rachel was awakened by a sound at her window. She sat up in bed, heart racing, and saw a shadowy figure outside. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure slowly raised a hand and tapped on the window. Rachel's mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do. Should she call the police? Try to run? She was frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. The figure outside the window continued to tap, almost like it was taunting her. Rachel could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to control her breathing. She knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. Just as Rachel was about to scream, the tapping stopped. The figure disappeared into the night, leaving her alone and trembling in her bed. Rachel didn't sleep the rest of the night. She stayed awake, staring at the window, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. The next morning, Rachel called the police to report the incident. They came to her house and searched the area, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Everywhere she went, she felt like someone was following her. She became paranoid and reclusive, rarely leaving her house except for work. Days turned into weeks, and Rachel started to think that maybe it was all in her head. Maybe the voicemail was just a prank, and the figure outside her window was just a coincidence. Maybe she was just being paranoid. But then, one night, Rachel heard a knock at her door. She hesitated for a moment, but then decided to answer it. When she opened the door, she saw the figure from her window standing on her doorstep. It was a dark and stormy night, and Mary had just finished a long shift at the office. She was looking forward to getting home, taking a hot shower, and getting some much-needed rest. As she was walking to her car in the dimly lit parking lot, her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered it anyway. "Hello?" she said. The person on the other end of the line didn't say anything. Mary could hear breathing, heavy and labored, and it sent a chill down her spine. She was about to hang up when she heard a whisper. "I'm coming for you," the voice said. Mary's heart raced as she hung up the phone. She tried to shake it off and told herself it was just a prank call. But as she drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When she got home, Mary locked all the doors and windows and went straight to bed. But she couldn't sleep. Every little noise made her jump, and she kept checking her phone to see if the mysterious caller had tried to contact her again. The next day at work, Mary was still feeling uneasy. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to the phone call. She couldn't help but wonder who it could have been, and why they had called her. As the day went on, Mary began to notice that her coworker, John, was acting strange. He kept glancing over at her, and she could feel his eyes on her every time she turned her back. It made her feel uncomfortable, and she started to avoid him. That night, Mary's phone rang again. It was the same unknown number as before. She hesitated before answering, but her curiosity got the better of her. "Hello?" she said. This time there was no breathing on the other end of the line, just silence. Mary was about to hang up when she heard a faint whisper. "It's me," the voice said. Mary's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. It was John's. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to say sorry," John said. "I didn't mean to scare you." Mary didn't know what to say. Part of her was relieved that it was just a prank, but another part of her was angry that John had scared her like that. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "I don't know," John said. "I thought it would be funny. I never meant to hurt you." Mary hung up the phone, feeling angry and confused. She couldn't believe that John had done something like that. She knew that she would never be able to trust him again. The next day at work, Mary tried to avoid John as much as possible. She didn't want to speak to him or even look at him, but she couldn't escape the feeling that he was watching her. As she was leaving work that night, Mary heard footsteps behind her. She turned around, but there was no one there. She started to walk faster, her heart racing. The footsteps grew louder and faster, and she knew that someone was chasing her. She turned around again, and this time she saw John. He had a wild look in his eyes, and he was holding a knife. "Mary, wait!" he yelled. Mary turned and ran as fast as she could. She could hear John's footsteps behind her, getting closer and closer. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she had to get away from him. Finally, she saw her car in the distance. She sprinted towards it, fumbling with her keys as she ran. She could hear John getting closer, his breathing heavy and labored. Mary managed to unlock the door and jump into her car, slamming the door shut behind her. She quickly locked the doors and started the engine, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked in the rearview mirror and saw John standing behind her car, his knife glinting in the dim light. She drove away as fast as she could, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't believe that John had tried to kill her. She had trusted him, and he had betrayed her in the worst possible way. When she got home, Mary called the police and told them everything that had happened. They arrested John, and he was charged with attempted murder. Mary never saw him again, but the memory of that night haunted her for years to come. She couldn't believe that someone she had worked with every day could be capable of such a horrific act. She had always thought of John as a harmless prankster, but now she knew that she could never truly know what was in someone's heart. From that day forward, Mary never answered unknown numbers or voicemails from people she didn't know. She couldn't bear the thought of being caught off guard again. But even as she tried to move on with her life, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She would often hear footsteps behind her, or see a shadow out of the corner of her eye. She never knew if it was just her imagination or if someone was really there, waiting to harm her. In the end, Mary never forgot the lesson that she learned that fateful night. She knew that she could never be too careful, and that even the people she thought she knew the best could be hiding a dark and dangerous secret.